Welcome back to World War Now, everybody. I'm your host, Conrad Franz, joined as always by Dmitry Kalyagin. We have a great show for you this time. It's going to be a packed one because, boy, are things going off in all sorts of places around the world, theologically, on the military front, on the geoeconomic, strategic shipping routes front, all sorts of things are happening. Of course, the Red Sea and Israel will be one of our main focuses, but there's big stuff going on in Ukraine, huge stuff going on the home front here in the United States, and of course, Vatican City, a lot of things going on there as well. So a packed show, be sure to, strap in because this one's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be long, but it's certainly going to be dense. So Dimitri, how are you doing?
Doing great, Conrad. And just as you've said, the year is coming to an end and there's just things going on all around, right? So 2023, it's been a year of not just energy disruption, but as it seems, based on what's happening in the Red Sea and just near the Horn of Africa, near the Arabian Peninsula, it's a disruption of shipments. So shipments of goods we saw earlier in 2023, the huge agricultural issues occurring in the Black Sea with Ukraine, Russia, the grain deal falling through of Turkey, sort of hints at a potential Russo-Turkish conflict again, kind of subsiding and being put to the side, at least for now, frozen. And at the moment, what we're seeing is the Yemenis Houthis, the free people of Yemen, again, rising up. And just like in the last few weeks, we reported on this particular Houthi Islamic, it's essentially a liberation of Yemen movement who've, these people have fought against Saudi Arabian oppression for decades at this point and successfully have resisted them. And, we've spoken about how the Houthis are essentially a Hezbollah slash Hamas-esque Yemeni movement. And now they've suddenly begun threatening the Red Sea Straits towards the south, near the Gulf of Aden, and have essentially prevented shipments from going through, and actually started threatening, saying that any ships linked to Israel, which they said they have the capacity to actually find out which ships are either trading with Israel or carrying goods to Israel, will be shot at from from Yemen itself by long-range missiles, or even taken over by, as we've seen from some of the clips from earlier weeks, they actually take over crews with helicopters assaulting these big ships. And these ships are like gigantic, right? These are massive ships carrying goods from one side to the other side of the world. So this particular strait, and what was the response to it, right? The US, the coalition, Israel's allies, you can say it's almost like a NATO operation, but they've called it an international coalition, has begun an operation in order to stop these Yemeni Houthis from preventing these shipments, right? And the operation is called Operation Prosperity Guardian, because they're the shipments through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea need to be protected in order for the world to be prosperous and for the world to be defended. Let's set aside the fact that huge shipments out of Ukraine and Russia have been put, essentially at giant risk through the sanctions, through the instigation of the war, through the failure of both sides to achieve a peace treaty by meddling of the UK and the US, right? But so prosperity there wasn't very important. But here suddenly, because Israel is affected, suddenly Greece, Canada, the UK, the US suddenly sending warships back to the Middle East, just as like we saw during the Afghanistan and the Iraq wars, sending American troops, because it is a mostly American operation in order to, I guess, uphold the capitalistic world order. It's all very pessimistic and quite scary. So the brave Houthis, again, are standing their ground, not just against Israel at this point, but against these Western globalist leaders.
Yeah, the Yemenis or the Houthis, you can call them both, I guess. Houthis, I guess, slightly diminutive because, like we've said before, they are like the government of Yemen. They control the capital. They control 95% of the population. They beat Saudi Arabia and their U.S. weapons in the war. So Yemen is their country. And yeah, Yahya Saraya, who's, the main Houthi spokesperson, he's the guy that you always see in the videos, yelling really loudly for the entire announcement in like the kind of weird monotone yell, like, I give glory to God and the brave fighters of Yemen and Gaza, and here we are today, and we have decided to target every ship. Every ship going to Israel is now, like, he says it in that way, and they've decided, yeah, every ship on its way to Israel is being targeted, and they say it won't stop until the only ships that will be allowed through are ones carrying humanitarian aid and food aid and whatnot to Gaza, and they won't stop till a ceasefire is reached and Israel, retreats and surrenders and gives up. And again, this is really big because not only have the US, deployed this operation, which isn't going as well as they planned, the French and the Italians have already pulled out to protect their own ships in their own independent operation. And as of right now, the only ships involved are the 7 U.S. Navy ships involving the USS Eisenhower, the aircraft carrier, and then a British ship and a Greek ship. The Australians literally sent 11 staff officers, so that is their participation in Operation Prosperity Guardian. So thank you, Aussie bros, for that one. And of course, they included on the list the Seychelles. So we recruit the naval superpower of the Seychelles, population 100,000 off the coast of Africa, to enlist in this operation. So this shows you how willing people were to engage in a international U.S.-led operation around something, as other commentators pointed out, as something as basically uncontroversial as protecting the most important global shipping route in the world. It seems that the world can't even agree on that. So multipolarity has truly arrived in that regard. But not only is the response and the effective war, but not really declaring war on the Houthis in Yemen, not working properly for the U.S., but Iran and even Saudi Arabia have basically given the Houthis a green light. Saudi Arabia has completely rejected normalization with Israel and is telling other countries that they should break ties with Israel. And Iran, when asked by the U.S. to, I guess, bring the Houthis to heel, they said no. You can bring Israel to heel, and then maybe we'll tell the Houthis to stop. And then this comes on the verge of, I want to get your thoughts on this. The Pentagon recently released a statement saying that they believe a ship was hit in the Indian Ocean, shot from Iran proper, like not Houthis as a proxy, but that the Iranians themselves hit this ship. I'm wondering your thoughts on this and how this whole situation could escalate.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and it's quite telling that Iran to this point has denied actually supporting openly the Houthis in Yemen. In fact, Iran has denied supporting everyone except Hezbollah. So Iran has stated, a few times, it's been quite clear that Hezbollah is very much not an Iranian proxy, but they're willing to ally themselves with Hezbollah openly. Meanwhile, we saw rumors and even maybe misinformation thrown in, around October, around the time of the Operation Al-Aqsa Mosque by Hamas, that Hamas was also a proxy of Iran, but that's kind of fallen through, and that's Iran has never claimed that. And in fact, Iran has never claimed to actually openly control the Yemenis Houthis. These Houthis are very kind of yeah, maybe they're allied with Iran, but Iran has never claimed that. And to this day, again, Iran is denying any of this involvement in the Suez Canal Red Sea crisis, which I think is very telling because Iran understands things have heightened to such an extent, and we've all spoken about this for over a year now, but we are on the verge of World War III, and the only question is where will this World War III escalate to a hot point, or there's already hot points around the world, but Iran doesn't want to be one of the initial places where this is staged. And this is not really in theory, but Iran does see, I think, provocations, not just by Israelis, but also during the Trump administration. The U.S. itself has, Donald Trump several times by assassinating the Iranian general, by attacking Iranian positions in Syria, things like that, and Iraq as well, has already shown that it's willing actually to go, or at least have a long-range war with Iran, and it has had a trade war with Iran for a few decades now at this point since the revolution. So Iran does see that provocations are afoot, and this recent bombing in the Indian Ocean. I mean, I think Iran will adamantly deny any involvement in that. It's just a matter of, well, how far is the U.S. and its allies willing? How far are they willing to go? And will India, as well as this sort of BRICS, this strong BRICS ally that the U.S. apparently has, and it's one of the few BRICS countries which is quite friendly with the United States. Is India willing to go, with the US and kind of pressure Iran into, maybe making a public apology of sorts? It's really strenuous at this point. We can see the entire Middle Eastern conflict at the moment. The world needs a bad guy. And the bad guy being Hamas is it's a little bit hard to paint Hamas as the bad guys because they've been oppressed for so long. So there needs to be a new big baddie, and that new big baddie is clearly Persia and Iran, and that's a very easy target as well because not only does it sound like Iraq, which we've been taught since for 2 decades already that was the main enemy of freedom and democracy in the Middle East, but Iran also has been painted several times over the last few decades as the main Islamic enemy superpower in the Middle East that needs to be taken down. So I think Iran is very aware of this, and they're going to take including diplomatic measures, for example, through both China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, in order to stop any provocation from taking place and being dragged into a new hot war in the Middle East. I think it's extremely dangerous what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, and this all comes this happened today, I believe. The UN basically announced after 9 years a normalization between the Houthi forces and whatever other backed forces are in Yemen. And I think this comes as Saudi Arabia basically accepts that the Islamic world is totally united now behind Gaza and behind the Palestinians. And there's just no political, geostrategic, religious, there's just no benefit or reason to go against the Palestinians in this regard. I guess the UAE is the only power that sees it differently at this point. Maybe Bahrain, I'm not sure exactly where they've been standing. I know the UAE have been the major cucks, but Saudi Arabia, even though they're usually big and sweet on Israel and the US, it seems that for better or for worse, Mohammed bin Salman and the others have realized that, it would not be strategic to ally against the rest of the Islamic world at this point. I mean, we see Malaysia, threatening to close off the Malacca Straits, to ships bound for Israel and Israeli ships. Malaysia, going hard as a Muslim country. I mean, remember, Indonesia, the fourth most populous country in the world, very pro-Palestinian at this point. So, the population is not on Israel's side around the world if you're thinking about this globally. But as far as Iran, you mentioned India. I think actually Kashmir and India-Pakistan is heating up, which would mirror onto the Israel-Palestine conflict, as Pakistan is a strong supporter of Israel and Pakistan is a strong supporter of Palestine, and Israel and India are close allies. So in that regard, there's the whole anti-Muslim thing with the Hindu nationalists and everything. We don't have time to talk about Kashmir, but that's something we'll be keeping our eyes on. But yeah, I'm sure Iran will deny the attack on the ship in the Indian Ocean. I'm sure that, again, the Pentagon will decide whether they not want to believe them or not, and whether they want to push this as a escalation towards them, because again, there's a big danger. I mean, there's just a big potential for escalation right now, as the Houthis have shown. I believe they conducted the first successful ground-to-ship assault in like modern warfare history, with a land-based missile hitting a ship. That's the Houthis on on some kind of U.S.-Israeli ship, and so I think they realized that there's some major hardware in danger, whether it's an aircraft carrier or another ship, and this could go down. And I mean, if that goes down, all bets are off, of course. I mean, we mentioned World War III. I believe we're already in World War III, but if we say World War III begins, that means, a superpower gets involved, and that means Iran, the US, Russia, and obviously Russia's involved in Ukraine. But if Russia then embraces another front, that would easily be like, anyone would recognize that as World War III, not just us, prophecy heads on here talking about this. But Dimitri, you mentioned Hezbollah, and that's kind of where we have to go next. Of course, I don't know how much Hezbollah has been escalating more so as Israel has been escalating. There's reports that Biden specifically asked Netanyahu not to carry out preemptive strikes against Hezbollah. They say the U.S. doubted Israeli intelligence on Hezbollah preparing to cross the Israeli border in an Al-Aqsa flood-style attack, I guess you could say. But Israel has really been going hard on the southern countryside and even more northern regions of Lebanon. And of course, they recently struck an Orthodox monastery of St. Mamas, which was tragic. And it seems that Israel seems to already be treating this as a multi-front war, as opposed to waiting for something to happen. And the whole Muslim world, of course, is waiting for Hezbollah to act. But that's the thing about the Houthis, is for better or for worse, they are the only ones in the Islamic world actually putting their money where their mouth is. Like, everyone else is like, they have all the rhetoric. They're rattling the saber against the Zionist entity. They're saying they want to drive them out of Tel Aviv, out of Jerusalem, to avenge the martyrs. But only the Houthis have only not marched in hundreds of thousands on Israel because the Saudis have refused them passage. They're literally doing everything they can with their missiles. They've literally blockaded the Bab al-Mandeb and the Suez Canal. Like, these are the most relevant trade routes. They've effectively, disrupted global trade to raise awareness and they've all said, look, just ceasefire, just stop bombing Gaza, and this stops. So they've really gained a lot of leverage in a very short amount of time. So really hats off to them for being the only people to put their money where their mouth is there. But Dimitri, I'm wondering what you're thinking on this monastery destruction.
So regarding the situation of the monastery in Lebanon actually being bombed by Israel, the IDF, again, it's similar to the Ukrainian bombing of monasteries and churches, which we've seen throughout the last year and a half. It's just somehow, these bombs and these planes, right? They just happen to fly over Christian territory, and it's a monastery. It's literally isolated in the forest near some hills. There's no army base next to it. There are no targets, so there's no real excuse for Israeli. And in the Israeli military, it's very accurate. Like, it's naturally, or the bombardment of the civilians in Gaza. These are not accidental. These are planned collateral targetings of civilians in Palestine. We've seen in Gaza, we've seen this. It's quite explicit. There will be war crime trials after this, but of course the bombardment of an Orthodox monastery, and it's, I think we haven't seen real evidence of like how severe the destruction is at the moment, but it is quite telling. And I think on an esoteric note, right, St. Mamas, for those of you not aware, St. Mamas is one of the early saints from the region. He was a saint who lived in the 200s AD, I think 250 to about 270. He was a young Orthodox Christian man who was martyred in Caesarea, which was a city in northern Israel at that time, in the Roman Empire. It was one of the main actual early dioceses of the Christian church, even larger to some extent than Jerusalem itself. But St. Mamas, in the Life of Saints narrative, he actually had a pet lion. And him and his pet lion were in the story, as he was martyred, his lion actually came, picked up his body, and like took it to the local Christian community. And then there's this lion that is like a symbol of the saint. A lot of Saint Mama's icons, the lion is present, and we see this in a lot in Middle Eastern Orthodox Christians. The lion, just like the bear in the lives of Russian saints, is very present. The lion is present in a lot of the lives of these Middle Eastern Christians, and we also see in propaganda of Zionists in Israel, they try to take the lion as the symbol of Zionism, but in fact, the lion is used by Orthodox Christians a lot more legitimately. It is the symbol, of course, of the house of Judah. Christ, the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of God. He came from that particular house, and the Zionist Israelis trying to take that symbol for themselves. I think it's probably quite telling, and they know exactly who that monastery belongs to, mind you. Like, they have all the targets. They know exactly each facility on the Lebanese map. They've studied these territories for decades on end, right? So the Israeli military doctrine is very well developed, and so I guess symbolically speaking, them striking, this Saint Porphyrius Church, this particular monastery of Saint Mamas, it is this, like, again, battle of symbols, right? We've seen the story of the 40 beheaded babies, all these weird analogies that they make all the time. You best believe it's planned in some esoteric sense. But again, very sad, because if we receive news about monks being killed, things like that, which may emerge in the next coming days and weeks from Lebanon, again, this is more losses for the local Christian communities, which are not exactly, they're not exactly up and coming and prosperous either. Like, these are very small communities which somehow have survived since, we can say the Islamic conquest and things like that. These communities have learned how to thrive in the very difficult circumstances with very little funding, very little pilgrimages, throughout the, tumultuous few centuries. So it's just very sad that the IDF chooses to target these Christian communities, but it's not surprising. Like, lest we forget what the Zionist and the, shall we say, like, Rothschild type leadership in Ukraine has been doing for the last year and a half, or even the last 8 years since 2014. So again, it's part of that same anti-Christian trend. If it's not, political persecution, it's, whoops, the military has accidentally bombed an Orthodox monastery, right? It's very similar, and we do understand the Muslims who, they claim that, random mosques have been getting bombed all over Palestine. We do have solidarity in that. These people, they treat Christians and Muslims in many ways in the same fashion. They do see us all as unworthy goyim, as idolaters, and they do target our, so to speak, our respective holy places. I think it's part of that ideological warfare that we've seen in the Middle East we've seen it for a long time, but now we see it in a very explicit, degenerate sense.
People may ask, like, oh, why would Israel destroy these random churches? Don't they know it's bad optics? It's like, look, this is in Deir Memas, which is a town in southern Lebanon, but not like far southern Lebanon. This is near the Golan Heights, near the border with the Golan Heights. And this is territory that they explicitly want. Why are they trying to provoke Hezbollah? They want to provoke Hezbollah to permanently occupy the southern regions of Lebanon. And they don't want to occupy these places full of mosques and full of churches with these pesky Christians and these people that won't submit to their Noahide laws and all these other things and ultimately worship, the Antichrist at the Temple Mount. They want all of that cleared out, and if they can clear it out under the pretense of, a legitimate war against Hamas and terrorism, they're going to do that as opposed to, just doing what they're going to eventually do, which is just march on those places and kick those people out. So, that's why that's happening. This area lies well deep within the heart of Greater Israel. So the fact that they are still having to clear these places out is probably pretty frustrating to, the Kahanists and the Maximalists in the region. But yeah, no, it's a tragedy. Of course, they struck St. George Orthodox Church in southern Lebanon a few weeks back. We talked about that. Of course, St. Porphyrios Church. And they've been bombing multiple properties of the Latin Patriarchate in Gaza, of course, as well. The united heads of all the churches of Jerusalem released a statement about their recent meeting with President Isaac Herzog of Israel. And apparently the Israeli media was spinning it as if it was just a Christmas-related visit, but they were like, no, this was about us demanding a ceasefire and demanding that you stop targeting Christian sites like you've clearly been doing, and things like that. So it's very tense in the Holy Land right now, right on, Christmas Eve. By the way, Merry Christmas, everybody. Of course, everyone in the West is celebrating, and everyone on the new calendar in the Orthodox Church, of course, is celebrating. Obviously, you on the old calendar have a few more weeks to go, but no, it's unfortunate that all these things are happening and these Christian places are being targeted on the eve of the celebration of the birth of Christ. It's very tragic. But again, with Gaza, these people are getting pushed further and further south. They're going deeper and deeper. And however, it does seem that Hamas is really, lasting longer and putting up a fight and really getting their own body count pretty high and taking out a whole lot of Merkava tanks as far as I can tell.
Yeah, that's right. I think in terms of, there are the fortunate statistics of, and the photographs of the random tanks and armored troop carriers just completely destroyed and trashed. And we know these things do not belong to Hamas, because Hamas in general, it's just, how do we say it? They have scouts, infantry, and that's about it. They have no navy, no armored vehicles, things like that. It's definitely very limited. Meanwhile, on the Israeli side, you do have these armored vehicles, planes, things like that. So actually seeing all this armor being destroyed by the Hamas resistance is very I think it's really foretelling the fact that their resistance is going so strong, and it's essentially guerrilla warfare at the high to the highest extent, very urban warfare esque, and that's only because Israel chose to actually physically invade Gaza. I think that's the main problem in terms of like civilian losses and these negative statistics, because 2023 is coming to an end. We're almost 2-3 months now into it's coming on to the third month of the Operation Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Israeli retaliation in Palestine and Gaza, and this inhuman war that they've started against the Palestinians. But we are looking at close to 20,000 people dead confirmed, between 8 and 9,000 children. And these are children under the age of 18. Most of them, in fact, a lot of them babies and infants, and children of pre-high school, pre-middle school age. It's really horrific, and these numbers are staggering. We've said this for a few weeks, but this is nothing like what we've seen, I guess, in the 21st century combined. I mean, even during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, this sort of concentration of deaths, we've just simply not kind of laid our eyes upon this. So it does seem like a big ritual sacrifice of sorts. We've said this a few times, but yeah, just horrific statistics. It is reaching that level where, and I think the world is coming, in solidarity and by the world, I don't mean like the forces of the globalists. I mean these various communities which will form the future multipolar world are all coming together in solidarity through the United Nations and voting for things like a two-state solution, pressure in Israel, ceasefires, things like that from different, and even country like India again is voting for these things. So we're seeing, despite the anti-Islamic rhetoric happening at home, some of these countries, which are not exactly all pro-Muslim, they are realizing, even in countries like Australia, right, occupied by essentially Zog and globalism, is voting for some of these anti-Israeli propositions at the United Nations. Not that Israel will follow along and listen to these propositions, right, at the General Assembly or even from the Security Council itself, right. Israel is very, very independent, very prideful at the moment. Netanyahu personally is like the personification of this pride, like this satanic figure that he is. But I think definitely the more the conflict will continue, the more solidarity the Muslim world will show. I really liked Alexander Dugin's comment, just closing the sort of Houthi segment of this episode, is just he's saying that the Houthis are keeping the Islamic world accountable, because they're the only ones who are actually, alongside Hezbollah, they're the only two groups which are keeping the Islamic world in support of Palestine really properly. They have teeth in the game. They are actually retaliating, and they're not bringing shame to their particular religion and their religious cultural solidarity which they have with the Palestinians and Arabs of the region. I think that's worthy of something, and I think long term it'll look really nice in the history books, and also in the if the Islamic forces do win this war long term, ideologically as well as actually physically on the ground, I think the Houthis will be raised up on the shields of this resistance and the coming order in the Middle East. We can say that.
Well, with the exception of Hamas itself, the Shia world definitely wins in regards to, actually resisting Israel, whether it's Hezbollah, the Houthis, or, the Islamic resistance in Iraq and Syria, which have united and are the ones that have been consistently bombing the U.S. bases there. And so that axis is effectively all Shia. So I don't know, maybe Hamas, maybe they need to convert to Shia Islam. I don't know if that's what that means. Obviously they all need to become Orthodox if they want to have a chance at any kind of real victory. But again, we have to look at this from the perspective of, again, Hamas doing fairly well, Hezbollah always there in the north, escalation possible at any point, and the Houthis really, going balls to the wall on this, really, pressuring the U.S., keeping these critical shipping routes effectively hostage until Gaza gets, relief. And you have to start to question, like, what happens in the midst of a Israeli collapse, whether it's a regime collapse and a sort of, not civil war, but, very much transitional, unsure leadership stage, because we know Netanyahu, he doesn't go down without a fight. And then, of course, even the situation of, let's say, the U.S. decides to go really hard on Iran and the Houthis and just kick it up a notch, and then they decide, let's just go all in on Israel. Like, what happens in a potential, Israel collapse situation? Like, let's say, we start to see some end times type stuff, like Al-Aqsa Mosque exploded, people storming into, these holy places, and Tel Aviv itself and other things like that, Jerusalem, the walls torn down. Iran, directly moving in, Hezbollah, this all happening around the same time as the election. If you want to hear a certain kind of take on this regard, with this somewhat eschatological thing, be sure to listen to our latest Ether Hour, the Q&A we just did for supporters. We discussed this. We discussed the issue of Donald Trump as a potential type of antichrist. So you're going to want to listen to that. It'll be linked below. But yeah, all of this is going down as we get closer and closer to that 2024 election. And of course, there's elections in Russia. There's elections in other places around the world as well. But all eyes are, of course, on the United States, on Washington, D.C., as, of course, the persecution of Donald Trump continues. And the latest take being, of course, the Colorado Supreme Court banning him from the Republican primary ballot. So as of right now, since the Supreme Court hasn't weighed in yet, Trump is no longer on the, like, if you're voting as a Republican, you'll only be able to vote for Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, or Chris Christie, or you'd have to write somebody in. And of course, that's ridiculous. Obviously, I'm pretty confident this will get overturned by the Supreme Court. And even Gavin Newsom came out totally against this similar idea in California. So obviously this is even unpopular on the left. But this is really interesting, and it really ties into, again, we've talked about Donnie Darkin. He's a guy kind of positing some of these theories about Trump and, his potential parallels with, unfortunate figures in the future. And this is one of those things where as Trump, perhaps comes into power with even characters like Louis Farrakhan and people you wouldn't expect supporting him, he may come in to, render in or help somebody else, perhaps of the tribe of Dan, render in a peace that, no one saw coming in the Middle East or whatever. And these are the kind of things, people have to be wary for. So, Dimitri, what are your thoughts on this Trump situation?
I think it sets an incredibly dangerous precedent for, I don't want to sound like one of those main TV talk show hosts, but our democracy is in danger. And liberalism is under attack, and I mean very openly and in a real sense, because, well, what's the alternative here? Is it a dictatorship of the globalists, or is it a dictatorship of, say, Donald Trump? Because there is no alternative to liberal democracy in the U.S. The U.S. was built by the founding fathers as an election-based system where it's a representative government. There was never been a person who's held dictatorial power or anything similar to the monarchies we've seen in Europe. So there really is no alternative if elections are not free and fair. Right, so that's the standard. But this case of Anderson and Griswold in Colorado, that's gone all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court. Essentially, the majority of judges in this particular court has held that the 14th Amendment, right, and I'll read the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the United States, which so the judges have seen that Donald Trump is not eligible to actually be on the ballots in accordance with Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And I'll just read out the amendment. This is their interpretation, right, as the Supreme Court, the highest court in Colorado. This is how they interpret the 14th Amendment, and apparently it applies to Trump. So they said, so this is the amendment, Section 3. No person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States who have previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States, and Trump has, as the president has taken an oath, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So, but the Congress has not voted. There is no evidence that Trump has not gone through a court or has been proven to be an insurrectionist under the 14th Amendment. So the Colorado court, the Supreme Court, has essentially tried Donald Trump and found him guilty of insurrection for the first time. This is crazy. I mean, essentially, it's, he should be court-martialed. If he was a military general, like, this is some Shakespearean level Coriolanus like type of move, right? They're basically saying, look, he's a traitor to the United States. This is absolutely insane. And now they're just going to remove him off the ballot. And again, we're, just a bit less than a year away from the US election. What will this mean? There's other states are responding, other governors, other Supreme Court justices, lawyers from all over the US, constitutional lawyers, because this is, again, a constitutional law question. And don't get me wrong, for those saying that, the Constitution is, quite strong in the US, yeah, it's a really well-written document, but courts and judges and justices have misinterpreted plenty of times, which has led to really dire consequences, including child sacrifice. The 13th Amendment has been misinterpreted in the past, in the famous case of Roe v. Wade, to essentially legalize and allow abortion, right? So millions of babies and children have been aborted and murdered, essentially by medical practitioners and those actually bringing pregnant women into these abortion clinics by this false interpretation of the Constitution, right? And again, things like the Second Amendment has also been misinterpreted plenty of times by various courts around the country in different states. So certain weapons are illegal to, there's all kinds of misinterpretations of the Constitution. And this one essentially could lead to a civil war. I mean, it's getting really extreme in the US leading up to this next year election, 11 months away.
I mean, the Civil War predictive programming is going pretty hard. Obviously, any kind of civil war, quote unquote, in the US at this point would totally be like an op. It would be some kind of military, situation. There would never be like an actual, oh, two sides, liberals, red and blue, pitch battle. Like that doesn't make any sense. But the crazy thing about all of this is, like you said, this is unprecedented levels of persecution. Like literally, we went from, for better or for worse, most people respecting the elections, prior to 2016, for better or for worse, to now. I mean, yeah, I mean, unironic. Like our democracy is under attack. Straight up. I mean, I'm full MSNBC right now because that's literally just what's happening. I mean, they literally are just, this is like when Putin does this kind of stuff, it's like headlines all around the world, like, look at what this guy's doing. And he turns out he's like banning some like overt CIA agent or some like weird lesbian or something like that. And then, they ban, meanwhile, the Democrats and like entire state Supreme Courts ban the most popular presidential candidate in America. I mean, this literally comes as Trump leads in every single poll in every single battleground state. He's like up 5 in the RCP average. He didn't ever lead, he wasn't even within 4 points of any of his opponents ever in the 2016 or 2020 election cycles on the RCP average. Like, these are completely unprecedented polling numbers for Trump. If the election was held today, he would win in a landslide. It would be crazy. So, all of this is going on as he has this meteoric third rise. Again, like, did anyone think that, when Trump went down the escalator in 2015, that here we would be in 2023 still talking about him running for president? It kind of in its own way fulfills the fact that, he's almost already broken the 3-term rule because he was so relevant for the entire Biden term here. And then he's going to come back into power, and we know that at the end of his term he's going to have some claim to like, oh, we got to do a rerun on the first term because of the Russiagate. So we're in full-on post-democracy here. The age of Caesars, it has arrived, and the ether is tearing, monarchy rising, total dictatorial fascism is here. Sorry, libs, it's over. And they did it themselves. They perhaps fired the first shot across the bow. And turns out religious extremist monarchists have been waiting in the wings for this moment forever. So looks like it's over for the liberalism. But again, it's just, and this is all going to have a huge effect on whether it's the war in Ukraine or whether it's the Gaza situation, of course, this Red Sea situation, obviously, and then, of course, China, Taiwan. We'll talk about that later in the show. But as far as the situation in Russia goes, obviously, I think Trump would be much more willing to cede some territory to Putin, although I think he's more hoping that Biden will have to cede a lot of territory to Putin, and he'll just use that as an excuse to slam Biden and say, none of this would have happened if I was president, blah, 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 which, who knows if that's true or not. But I guess that takes us to some comments that Putin made recently. Dmitry, what did Vlad have to say about potential territories being ceded to other places? Something that we've been talking about since literally episode 1 of World War Now.
Yeah, very interestingly about Putin actually, and this came at the same time as this map of potential Ukrainian or Russian division, right? The division of the Ukrainian land has kind of been circulating around the Russosphere telegrams. So it kind of aligned with Putin making direct comments saying that, well, look, Ukraine, it's certain Western territories have at one point belonged to Poland, Lithuania, countries like that, Hungary, and making these comments directly to surrounded by military generals, and Putin's directly saying that, well, suggestingly, implicitly implying that, look, maybe Poland should step in and actually take certain Western territories for itself and maybe govern them in a better fashion than how the Ukrainian government has been doing it. I'm not exactly in opposition to that particular proposition, like temporarily, right? But again, Putin has made the suggestion that perhaps, this carcass of Ukraine, it can be dealt amongst, some of the powers of the region. Now, this comes, right, in light of the fact that Finland has officially, right, already more or less entered into NATO as well. And so Putin at the same time has also announced the creation of a new military oblast. So we've spoken about the different military oblasts around Russia. So this one is called the Leningrad Военный Okrug, right? So the Leningrad Военный Okrug is essentially this military command center, command zone, where essentially it has its own military administration just north of St. Petersburg, around the Karelia region, those regions adjacent to the Arctic Circle up there, but also essentially completely in line with Finland. So in order to, I guess, protect Russia from future NATO incursions in the region, or if a potential World War III breaks out. So again, very powerful announcements. And again, hypothetically here, Conrad, because a lot of people have been speaking on Telegram and Twitter and different places. Well, what would it look like if certain, if countries like Romania, Moldova took bits of Ukraine for themselves, and even countries like Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and what would happen if NATO countries actually took bits of Ukraine? Because wouldn't that technically move NATO even further east? I think that's one negative factor because, again, no one's making deals with Poland to step out of NATO, right? Like, we'd love if Poland, Hungary, Greece, if these potentially based and right-wing conservative future Christian, Christian-dominated countries would leave NATO and actually leave this abandoned, degenerate defense alliance. But this suggestion is not really being made. So just wondering your thoughts on it, because again, this is really up in the end. Putin's suggestion was very much a hypothetical, but a very strong one. Like, this is not Lukashenko, because Lukashenko would make these sort of statements on almost a weekly basis. But for Putin to suggest something like this is radical. And it also suggests that, look, Putin is probably willing to go all the way to Kiev, right? So some of his ministers have already made that statement, but Putin is directly saying that, look, Western Ukraine, we could have a division of the pie here, and we're willing to share some of whatever's left of Ukraine with you guys.
At this point, it definitely seems, at the very least, obviously the southern coast of the Black Sea and up to probably, the Dnieper River and perhaps farther is the minimum of what Russia is going to take. But yeah, we talk about the potential of NATO, moving east with these potential cessions of territory, Galicia and these places, Transcarpathia to Hungary and whatnot. But I think this really sets up Moldova as like the future neutral state battle, which again is probably just going to, frankly, be another Ukraine in the next 30, 40 years at the latest, because it's going to be another, who knows what happens after the Ukraine division happens. NATO's going to want to fast track Moldova. Russia's going to exert soft power on Moldova. I could see it perhaps getting fast tracked into NATO and that causing problems, or Russia fighting really hard and doing something even dramatic when it comes to, Pridnestrovia, Transnistria. So that's all coming and relevant into play. So yeah, I mean, Lithuania, I don't know how that border would work with the revival of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I think that would involve, some rejoining between Poland and Lithuania, which has been talked about. I mean, I don't know how much, Donald Tusk coming to power would be for that. He probably would be more in favor of that than actually taking any territory from Ukraine. I don't know his positions exactly. I need to look into it. I didn't think that dinosaur was going to come back into power. But yeah, the Poland situation got a little more interesting in that regard, I guess. And yeah, you mentioned Belarus taking territory in the north of Ukraine. These are all possibilities on the table at this point. And of course, there is division in the ranks in Ukraine. Zelensky is, coping. He's trying to say, they're saying they're going to dig in and resist the advancements. So they've already completely abandoned, retaking territory. That's basically off the table. However, Putin seems to indicate that he's ready for a ceasefire. Do you think he's only saying that as a bluff? Do you what does he mean when he says that?
No, I think it's completely open, especially now that Zelensky has announced as well, right? So we see essentially both sides are mimicking one another. So at this point, everybody's speaking about peace except Zelensky, right? That's on one hand. Both sides have an election coming up, and both sides have very similar number of troops, which both presidents have confirmed. So Zelensky has said openly, we have 670,000 servicemen. Russia, President Putin has said we have close to just over 600,000. So it seems like the numbers on the ground are basically equal. Russia obviously having the technological advantage, but Ukraine having constant Western support financially, and also new shipments of all kinds of goods as well, missiles, things like that coming in all the time. And so the endless economy of the West is behind Ukraine. Let's just not forget that. Meanwhile, Russia really doesn't have anybody supporting it. Even China is not really shipping that much into Russia, frankly.
They have the powerful ammo-making North Korean warhorse behind them. Don't forget that.
True, lest we forget, and of course the Shahid drones from Iran and Persia. So, like, yes, there are supporting factors, but they don't equal what Ukraine has behind it, right? So, but definitely Russia does have allies. Russia is not as isolated as it once was, maybe during the Chechen campaigns, when literally nobody really was supporting them, and they had to literally solve their own problems, right, in the Georgian, in that region, and it was just really, really tough. But at this point, Russia does have international allies and support, and it's really good, I think, long term. But for sure, I think Putin's going for, I think he's aiming for a peace treaty now. Either Lukashenko has gotten to him, or maybe the fact that, look, at this point, it's really important to just solidify the front lines. This front lines haven't really moved much. We have Avdiivka falling, I mean, any week now at this point. The Russians have essentially all but taken it. The Donetsk front is a really, really tough actually to push through. Just the hillsides. We've seen Bakhmut has, now that we're looking back a year from now, like the year started with the siege of Bakhmut, and that has ended somewhere around April, May. So that took roughly 6 months, right? It's a 6 month long siege, and it's only one city. There's many more Bakhmut like scenarios hypothetically on the table in the Donetsk Oblast, right, which Ukraine still controls these makeshift fortress cities, which is really unfortunate because again, this is like destroyed landscape, which has been littered by shelling mines, things like that. It's just completely eradicated the territory through bombardment by both sides. It's really, really quite dramatic and horrible. But let's just not forget. So these front lines have solidified, and at this point, Russia has shown itself that look, it wants to be working potentially on a domestic situation moving towards the election, and it's a great time for both sides, I think, to actually strike a peace deal, even if it's 3-4 months long, until say April, May, maybe even the summer of 2024, so around June, July, and that way the election can come in. Putin can possibly arrange some changes to his cabinet, right? Maybe rearrange some ministers, things like that. So fix up United Russia, which has been, there have been movements in the Russian political sphere after COVID. Remember Medvedev moving to the sidelines, a new prime minister coming to power. So Russia has been having internal movements. Possibly Putin's getting a bit older at this point as well. So potentially maybe bringing forward a candidate for the future leadership of the party, maybe a future president. All these things can be done during more or less a ceasefire peacetime. For Ukraine, of course, this would mean dire consequence because, again, it's a wartime economy. You can say it's a completely internationally funded. The Ukrainians are the modern mujahideen, right, of the Taliban that we've seen Rambo 3. So these are directly outside funded forces. And just like Israel is very heavily funded by the U.S., these U.S. proxies in Ukraine, they depend on the war ongoing. So I think Zelensky will be resisting any peace pressure for a while now. But again, will a peace benefit Ukraine, and how will it benefit the church? These are all factors we have to take into account. Will persecution continue in Ukraine during peacetime as well? Because could they pressure the Russian side in order to act and to actually break the peace deal by bullying the Orthodox Church in Ukraine? Especially we're talking about the non-schismatic church, right? The Ukrainian Orthodox Church under Metropolitan Onufri. Will they continue Ukrainization of the population, a cultural genocide of anything Russian in the region? All these things can and will probably occur in peacetime as well. So a peace treaty, does it benefit Russian Orthodox folks? Yes, most likely in the short term. But if it's prolonged, then it's the peace deal lasts for an entire year and there's a ceasefire. What if 2 years? I mean, these are generations of people. These are thousands of people who will be negatively affected by this evil regime in Ukraine, right? Especially if Zelensky wins this election next year. So huge implications, I think. But prospect-wise, right, I think we are looking at every side except Ukraine wanting a peace deal and some sort of temporary ceasefire, similar to what everybody's been calling for in Gaza and between the Israelis and Hamas. People just want some breathing room, I think, especially the globalists who've been playing chess all over the world, and I think it would benefit Russia quite greatly.
Yeah, obviously, any kind of ceasefire hopefully would be followed by some pretty sizable concessions to the Russians, or else Putin might face some perhaps domestic resistance from patriotic entities, I guess you could say, though. I don't think he has any intention of cutting any of these, districts and oblasts that are now fully part of Russia in the constitution in half or anything like that. So I think there's some grander aspirations. And of course, there's still the military operation of demilitarizing Ukraine that they also say is ongoing and will continue to go on. So at the end of the day, no one truly knows what is happening because Putin is making some decisions and the West is making decisions. And do we even really know what Zelensky wants? I'm not sure. I mean, he probably is ready to go to the negotiating table, but I'm sure there's entities both within Ukraine and their quote unquote elite as well as the West. And, I'm sure even Israel is having a play in this because they recognize that it's the other hot conflict going on and that it directly will impact their support, as both of these entities are being directly funded and fully funded effectively by the United States. So how one fares, the other continues to go. So I'm wondering if the Israelis want a ceasefire, or if the Israelis want it to continue and escalate as a distraction point. I'm wondering, what do you think? Does Israel have an opinion on whether the war goes on or not?
Oh, absolutely. I think we we haven't really spoken about the Jewish factor, right? Just given the fact that Kolomoisky, Zelensky's greatest sponsor at his previous elections, is currently in prison, and he's sitting out a very cozy sentence due to corruption charges that he misappropriated funds which were, supposed to go towards the funding of the Ukrainian military, and he had his finger in a lot of different pies, and it's similar to Prigozhin in Russia, but a lot richer. He was literally the first or richest man in all of Ukraine. So this Jewish Zionist figure, right, Kolomoisky, and so who exactly stands behind Zelensky for this upcoming election, and what ties do they have to Israel? Because most of these folks have, like Kolomoisky's family had Israeli citizenship. Zelensky, exactly his Jewish relatives, right? Do they have Israeli citizenship? Can Netanyahu directly state that, look, you guys, we need to sign a peace treaty so the US can focus on supporting us and completing this Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea? Like, stop, taking away attention by this stupid fighting for some Donetsk Oblast, right? Like as important as Heavenly Jerusalem is as a sort of 2.0 project, I think they're not willing to take away from Israeli direct rabbinical support in Israel proper. I think the risks, the Islamic world is really pushing itself onto, like, encroaching on this, like, you can say occupied Jewish territory in this territory that the Israelis and Zionists have settled over the last few decades. I think this has placed a lot of pressure on the rabbinical community. So what exactly they're thinking behind the scenes? Yeah, I think you're right. It's taking eyes away from Ukraine, and there could be direct Israeli Zionist pressure on the families of some of these other oligarchs, similar to Kolomoisky. There is at least 10% of the parliamentarians in the Kiev parliament, in the Verkhovnaya Rada, either hold Israeli citizenship or they all can speak Yiddish or can speak Hebrew. They're all semi-quasi-Jewish, and that's like a huge misrepresentation, right? Because the Israeli population, the Jewish population of Ukraine is something like 0.5%. It's like less than 1%. Meanwhile, there are so many of them holding parliamentary seats. So yeah, that factor cannot be avoided. We've spoken about that factor in Moscow and Russia as well. It's not a separate subject, but we've spoken how that could potentially impact Russia's support for the resistance, against Zionism as well. There is that pressure behind the scenes. Like, what will the people, what kind of Maidan fifth column aspects could arise in Russia and in Ukraine as well. And Zelensky understands that. Zelensky is second to Netanyahu. Netanyahu is this quasi messiah type figure, and Zelensky is a clown compared to him. Like, he's not the most important Jew in world politics. Netanyahu is at the moment. So he just has to take the back seat. And I think that's what we have to appreciate as well, speaking about this big peace treaty. So you're completely right.
And of course, this all comes back to the US situation, and we don't really, again, Trump, very much a wild card. I don't know if he'll fully forgive Netanyahu. I don't know if Netanyahu will even be in power when and if Trump comes back to power as well. Obviously, we know Trump does have a grudge against him specifically. I don't know if there's other Likud members that he's closer with that he claims to like more than Netanyahu. I don't know how all this would go. Again, like I say in the Ether Hour episode, you have to go listen to it. We still do need to think about, post-Trump politics as well. He's not, I don't think, the final guy unless things get really crazy. But the overall, like, these two conflicts are just so intertwined, both because of the, ethnic Jewish connection, the religious connection, and just the geographical proximity. They're not that far from one another, just a Black Sea away. And all of this region, just the center of the world, Jerusalem, it's no wonder that all these things are happening around this part of the world and in the Third Rome and around areas of the former Second Rome and Constantinople. And of course, Greece is one of the only countries that's been roped into this situation. We mentioned them with Operation Prosperity Guardian. One of their ships is in the Red Sea. I can't imagine the Greek people are too happy about that. So, we have to keep watching that situation. Again, Mitsotakis in Greece insists on doing the whole gay marriage thing. And of course, the Orthodox Church in Greece has come out against that. Not as strongly as perhaps the Russian church might or others, but they said, we're against gay marriage, we're against gay adoption, which they tried to do. And so then Mitsotakis and the government's like, okay, how about this? No gay adoption, but gay marriage. And the church is like, no, not what we said. So, pray for Greece. It's a really unfortunate situation over there.
Yeah, so it's just, speaking about the free roams and kind of, or the encroachment on Orthodox lands, right? We see the Euro Commission has, officially stated that we'd like to integrate Georgia into the European Union. We saw that letter from allegedly from Patriarch Ilya. So Georgia as well, just like Greece, is being roped into this weird coalition. Like, the West does know that it does need to, take over official Orthodox lands and push their governments in order to support this I guess falling hegemonic world order, right? It's really weird how these countries are getting more and more involved in supporting, the West. And when we say the West, we mean mainly the EU, the US, and NATO. These particular three countries slash organizations and these alliances. So Georgia and Greece really need to move away from that. I'm not saying they need to directly ally themselves with Russia or this modern iteration in the Russian Federation if they don't want to, but definitely to move away from being enslaved by these Western globalist states, which disrupt and degenerate their local cultures. I think that's probably the first step, right, in order to achieve actual cultural and states right, proper state sovereignty, which we speak about and which you learn about in political science classes and international relations. This is like the basics, right? Not have your cultures be subjugated to these Western innovations, right? But I think.
Well, when you talk about,
Mhm.
you mentioned Georgia, people can scream at me in the comments all they want. I'm sorry if it's any Georgia listeners. I'm sure they might disagree, especially in the diaspora. But I spoke with the former interior minister of Georgia in Russia, and he told me, 40, 50% of Georgians, behind closed doors, they're pro-Russia. They don't mind Russia. Of course, they're still nationalist Georgians, but, they don't believe a lot of the propaganda that claims that the empire was trying to genocide them or the Georgian language. We've talked about how that's not really true and whatnot. So, maybe we have some some Georgian Russophiles, on the show in the future, or some Georgian people to talk about some of these things. But, yeah, that's an interesting point about I almost forgot about Georgia, granted EU candidate status. So that's definitely another big push. That's the US, putting pressure on Russia. I mean, they released their plans for, US troop placements in these Finnish bases all along the Russian border due to their NATO membership. And now this effective extension of the future EU border now to Russia. This is definitely, a soft power flex from the US that they're trying to show that they still have some relevance and power as Russia has enforced their mandate on the ground and totally defeated the Ukrainian military in their offensive. So, and of course, this comes as the US, like you said, their failed coalition in the Red Sea, they can't even get that together. So, as many others have said, multipolarity is here. This is all really happening. But yeah, just as unfortunately Greece is battling with gay marriage on the civil front, of course, the church standing strong, even churches that we think have some problems, like the church in Greece and, of course, the ecumenical patriarchate, which we talk about that in the Ether Hour as well. Dimitri really breaks down, the issues of his canonical jurisdiction and his real authority and whatnot. So again, linked below, check it out. Get behind the paywall to hear the whole thing. It really helps us out. But that, of course, leads us into, Rome itself, the fallen Rome, the papist Rome, how they seem to have embraced blessing of gay marriages. And again, there's going to be a lot of cope. That's really basically almost just as much of a story as the actual document itself, being Fiducia Supplicans, which is the latest document from Pope Francis that says effectively that couples involved in same-sex relations can receive a blessing from a priest. And of course, the statement that couples in same-sex relationships can be blessed appears in the document 4 times. And we saw everybody's favorite Jesuit, Father James Martin, immediately bless a quote-unquote married gay couple holding hands in his church. He blessed them as a priest, and we're just seeing this happen. He's not going to face any discipline if everyone's claiming, oh, that goes against the document, he did it wrong, all this stuff. Well, when he gets disciplined by the Pope, you can say you were right, but I highly doubt that's going to happen. He's blessed by the Pope. He has all sorts of privileges due to the Pope, and the Pope's a big fan of his. The Pope himself being a Jesuit, Father James Martin, high up at America magazine, so Jesuit, the main publication in America. So this is all, the coping is just getting very tiresome, of course. And I think there's all these Zambian and African bishops and a few other bishops, have really come out banning, these in their archdiocese. So I think the issue with this is don't you see Dimitri, that it demonstrates, that papist ecclesiology obviously is, that's the reason everyone is coping, isn't so much because of, the gay marriage thing is one thing, that ship has sailed. But now it's about, the Pope is really infallible still, I swear, right?
Oh, 100%. It really shows that, papal and Roman Catholic ecclesiology throughout the centuries has not only evolved but become worse. Like it's literally worsened over time. And the fact that individual popes had so much authority to make these,
Hold on. Do you hear that? Do you hear that?
oh,
I think the World War Now office landline is ringing. How does anyone have this phone number? This is ridiculous. Let me see, the caller ID says Louisiana. Let me pick this up.
It's a real pleasure to be on today with y'all today, man. I don't know if y'all know who I am, but I'm the host of Reason and Theology. It's a Catholic podcast that specializes on the Holy Father Pope Francis and explaining some of the really great decisions he's been making lately. And I just wanted to say hi. It's me, Michael Seraphim Lofton. So I just wanted to clarify a few things because I know my schismatic Orthodox friends. They've been really jumping at the bit to critique the Holy Father, and unfortunately, they've been capping a little bit. So just let me straighten a few things out for real. So I'm gonna introduce y'all to two words. I'm gonna let my audience hear this. Nuance and distinctions, baby. All right, let's talk about it. So recently the Pope, he been blessing the real relationship between the two gay men, not their union. The idea that the Pope is blessing unions is erroneous, and Cardinal Fernandez has been overwhelmingly clear, that we ain't blessing no gay unions. Hell nah, and it can't be liturgical neither. What this is, and for real, I want y'all schismatics to listen because it's reason and theology time. This is just a blessing of the real relationship and the good aspects, like the friendship and stuff, not the bad aspects, like side of me. You feel me? Reason and theology live. Michael Lofdog signing out. Also, I hate Christian Mario. He's a punk and he's always trying to imitate me, and he can't do it for real.
Wow. Well, I guess that just happened. So you heard it first, folks. We had our first live caller in World War Now, and that was something. Wow.
Yeah, I appreciate naturally given our differences, but I still appreciate Mr. Lofton's you know his opinion as a Roman Catholic, more on the of course liberal progressive side. But yeah, he's really stated that look, Pope Francis has in fact blessed the real relationship apparently of same-sex couples, but that's not really how the Catholic world sees it, is it, Conrad? I mean, I'm looking at Pope Francis and I'm seeing him essentially dismiss and banish Bishop Strickland in the U.S. from Texas. I'm seeing him do all kinds of make very liberal moves across the board, and suddenly he's directly in a document officially stating that giving his thousands of bishops and tens and hundreds of thousands of priests authority to essentially bless same-sex couples. I mean, how does the Roman Catholic Church even accept the fact that same-sex couples even exist, right? Because in the Orthodox Church, this is just it's not only is it weird and adulterous, it's also just open sodomy. And these couples are not even given a designation. Like the fact that you designate it as a same-sex couple means you are admitting that this couple can even exist, like factually, like in the real world. You're labeling it. I mean, this relationship is completely invalid. It's similar between, I mean, hypothetically, it's like the relationship between me and like, I don't know, a married woman or something. Like that's not a real relationship. That's just adultery, right? It's just the sin of the relation, or like a relationship between a man and a prostitute. That's, you can't bless that. I'm sorry. It's just unfortunately, unfortunately, this is a wrong view of relationships between humans and between adults. And the Roman Catholic Church, I mean, seems to have embraced this degenerate view of it through Pope Francis. And a lot of people are in opposition now.
Oh, it's really tearing apart the whole Catholic world. And look, I want to say our Catholic friends, we're going hard on you guys these days. I know it's hard to hear, but look, we just had our first Catholic caller. We had Michael Lofton on, and I think we gave him a fair hearing, So I think, I think, again, it's not a laughing matter for you Catholics. I know you're taking it very seriously, but again, I see everybody posting, like, look, the Archbishop of Kazakhstan has come out against it. Oh, look, the bishops of Malawi have come out against it. Look, it's all these people, and it's like, look, I mean, your ecclesiology isn't orthodox. Frankly, like, why should I care what some bishop says? He exists at the discretion of the Pope. The Pope can send his ass to Ketchikan, Alaska, send him to the Antarctic Latin Church, whatever they've got set up down there, whenever he wants. He could remove him. He could, like, it's Francis's world. You're just living in it, man. And I think that, I see all of them yearning effectively, and maybe they don't realize it. Maybe some of them do and are being obtuse. Like, I think Michael Lofton would be, of course. Thank you to Christian Mario for the fantastic impression. I think Michael Lofton should be flattered. I think imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? So come on, Michael, unblock Christian Mario. It's only fair. But I think I see them yearning for an orthodox ecclesiology. That's the thing. When we post something a bishop says, it matters, because just like you think the Pope is the successor to Peter, has the keys, we think of each bishop in their own territory in that exact same way. So And when we see the consensus patrum, become debated and bishops make certain statements, this is the synodal, reality of the Holy Spirit working in the church, even without actual conferences, actual councils. And look at Vatican II, look at the synod of synodality that Rome has been perpetually calling. Is this something that we really want these days? And I think in many ways, Orthodox ecclesiology is being, kind of shown for all to see as correct here. And so I definitely welcome, especially these African bishops and communities as, the Russian Exarchate expands, as certain archdioceses of the Alexandrian Patriarchate expand, come home, become Orthodox, please. I extend that, of course, to every other, Latin priest, bishop, layperson in America, in the West, everywhere, of course. But I mean, it's time. I mean, it's clearly time. And I know no one's going to gloat. No one's going to rub your face in it. That's not what it's about. It's just about, you're going to drive yourselves crazy justifying this stuff. And, eventually there's going to, like we see Archbishop Vigano effectively about to start an SSPX2. I mean, the only thing he hasn't done yet is ordain bishops and priests, which I'm sure the Pope wouldn't approve of. And that would be a whole nother, Marcel Lefebvre situation. So y'all are virgin on all sorts of weird schisms, even in your own eyes. People are very much more sympathetic to the SSPX, which is in a form of pseudo-schism, however much you want to deny it. So it's just see what's going on across the Bosphorus, as they say. See what's going on in Moscow and the Third Rome, and I think you'll be great. You'll be grateful that you did. I think that's how that goes. But it really is at least the people online like Michael Lofton that are going to be Pope-splaining about this. It really is about how this exposes papist ecclesiology as wrong, especially if you know that, as many are saying, that, well, the document doesn't say anything wrong. It has bad intent. That seems to be kind of the trad cope line. But if that's true, I mean, that throws your whole ecclesiology out of whack.
Yeah, and let's be real here, right? Conservative Roman Catholics, this papacy that's in power now, and you can say even since Vatican I, Vatican II, exactly what has it produced that has been similar to maybe, I mean, your most glorious period, so-called, during the Crusades, during the first, second, third Crusade, even, up to the Fourth Crusade, which was essentially a horrific act against the Orthodox Church and against the Orthodox Romans and Greeks at Constantinople. I mean, we're not in those times anymore. Things have changed, and it seems that even the battle that Catholics had against revolution, the Freemasons, Napoleon, the Catholic Church has been defeated, right? In terms of even worldly power and authority, the Vatican has been turned into this semi-closed-in structure, which, yes, has existed and persisted over the centuries and decades, but has lost, if not all authority, is at least subjugated in some regard by these new Jesuits who are not conservative at all, and Pope Francis, being one of their primary leaders, seems to be moving the entire church structure into this liberal frame, which again is incredibly degenerate and negative given the influence that he has. Like, people don't realize the size of the Roman Catholic Church, despite all of its, the fact that it's really not united, and there's so many different teachings within the Roman Catholic Church, which it's not even like jurisdictionally different. You have people praying for St. Palamas and St. Sergius of Radonej, and all kinds of weird stuff happening in the Uniate section. You have in the Middle East various divisions, but just the size of it, you have over 8,000 bishops in the Roman Catholic Church, all in all, right, in totality. Meanwhile, in the Orthodox Church, we have close to 900 bishops at the moment, with the majority being in the Russian Church as well as the Greek churches around the world. But just that size of bishops, the Pope has influence all over all of them, and he yet still puts out this major document which will throw the entire Western Christendom into disarray, and he's not afraid of doing that. So I think it's a big wake-up call, and it's just about time. It doesn't surprise myself and Conrad. It doesn't surprise many Christian commentators. The Russian Church has already spoken out, and frankly, Russian theologians have already said, look, well, if the Pope's going to keep doing that, like, the Roman Catholics are going to be severely limited in their missionary work allowed in Russia, because Russia has banned any promotion of LGBTQ values, which, if the Roman Catholic Church, through its bishops and those kind of forces, do push these ideas of same-sex couples in Russia and in new SMO zones, and even in Ukraine, the Russian Church will be responding really strongly, and most likely will use the state of the Russian Federation to uphold some of its laws and ethics and morals, because these are things that the Roman Catholic Church seems to be pushing. At least its leadership under Pope Francis is very immoral and degenerate. And yeah, it's funny because the head Uniate Metropolitan of Galicia and Lvov, he's actually spoken out against this. So he's, mind you, quite, from a Uniate perspective, he is a little bit like, I want to say, far right. He has supported various neo-Nazi movements in Ukraine since 2014. So he is very, like, I guess, conservative in that sense, from like a Teutonic Crusader type view. But yeah, we do see Catholic, as you mentioned, Catholic bishops. We've seen at least one or a few German bishops as well. Those who aren't liberal actually
Well,
speak.
it's even deeper than that. I mean, it's Sviatoslav Shevchuk, he's the patriarch effectively of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the people we talked about who were just banned in Zaporozhia, and he said that this is what I mean by it exposes Catholic ecclesiology. It says that Fiducia Supplicans, the document that priests supposedly use to bless homosexual so-called couples, apparently has no legal status in the UGCC and thus will not be implemented. He says effectively that this is only relevant in the Latin Church. So, what happened to, total papal jurisdiction, papal superiority, papal infallibility? Like, Dimitri, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're about to list, we had these German bishops, Malawi, Zambia, go on. But, like, how does this not completely expose the game?
No, 100%. Like again, this argument was used against us Orthodox for decades at this point, especially in online debates. Ever since the debate has moved into the internet sphere, it's been, well, the papacy secures this monolithic church structure. It is the pillar around which everything is built on. It is the foundation, the cornerstone, the rock, right? And everything stands on top of that. And there's this unity of jurisdiction, right? Despite differences, we're all united around the papacy and the Vatican. And at this point, the Vatican clearly puts out a document which nobody agrees with, or at least like a large portion of Christians around the world vehemently disagree with, and yet they're still called to follow the Pope and they're not following him. So where is this unity, which in the Orthodox Church, we don't have this problem because we are all Orthodox dogmatically, theologically, we all follow the Nicene Creed, and we all have very similar catechisms, which essentially do not differentiate at all, basically. It's so, again, our ecclesiology seems to work through these issues. You don't see us following, Archbishop Elpidophoros of Eastern United States and Go Arch essentially make these weird proclamations and baptizing the two. I mean, we've seen these analogies where he's baptizing the two kids in Greece. That was thrown down very strongly by the entire Orthodox community, baptizing the two kids belonging to the gay Greek couple. It was just a very controversial move that was made, but the Orthodox Church responded correctly. And they completely, banished that particular opinion. That's never going to happen again. And whenever Patriarch Bartholomew makes some cringe statement or says some really weird stuff, he gets criticized. And we don't have to follow what he does because he simply doesn't have jurisdiction over the entire world, like Pope Francis. I think this really speaks a lot to the Roman Catholic Church structure, and people should really think deeply about this. This is not a time to be, so-called humility, and it's not a time to be humble and to sort of meekly allow this to pass. I think this is one of those incremental moves which the Roman Catholic Church under Pope Francis and other previous popes, all these ecumenist statements, I'm just going to say this right now, but the Roman Catholic Church has been one of the most pro-Zionist, pro-Judaizing structures that has existed on earth in the 20th century. We don't need to give all the examples, right, Conrad? But the statements that the Jews didn't crucify Christ, things like that. This has come out of the mouths of popes. This is heresy, and it is just beyond anything that has happened, centuries before, and definitely has never happened in the Orthodox Church. So again, we're speaking about Israel, Zelensky, all these power structures, the bankers, the money power behind the world. The Roman Catholic Church, through its leaders, has actively participated in bringing these people to the forefront. So and I don't mean all the various Roman Catholic laymen and people like that who actually conservative and they want what's best for their families and their communities. I mean these cardinals and the people in charge at the Vatican. This black nobility that has ruled over this post-Renaissance papacy. I think it's just really negative, and it's time to wake up to that.
Yeah, again, all due respect to Michael Lofton and our Catholic listeners, but it really is, like, again, it's not a mockery thing, but the Pope's splaining and again, we say it's coping and these sort of things, the mental gymnastics, it becomes, it shows that the papacy is an idol. And I understand that there's a lot of tradition, and a lot of these countries that are historically Catholic really have, what you could consider a very genuine, enculturated, Christian tradition. And a lot of that stuff can be baptized into Orthodoxy, of course. It's not that, again, there is a Western Rite. A few people have mentioned that, perhaps the Western Rite needs to focus on explicitly being, something akin to an 8th century, Latin Mass and whatnot, and have that be the explicit focus and whatnot. I'm not a Western Rite expert, but I think that, again, the restriction of the Mass is going to be something that brings a lot of people towards Orthodoxy. I don't know if this will be as well. Hopefully it is. And perhaps I would see the greatest potential for that being in the second and third world, in Africa and these other places that may have just really had enough, and see especially with Russia demonstrating its ability to stand on a world stage, seeing that as a civilization and, of course, a church that, stands by doctrine and is actually guided by the Holy Spirit. So, I'm hopeful about that. But unless you have anything else to say about the, papal Vatican City situation, I mean, Shevchuk, the UGCC head, the Ukrainian Greek, it's ironic because he's really close with Pope Francis. They're really good friends. They knew each other before he was the Pope and everything, and they've gotten much closer. And Pope Francis, obviously, since as a big Vatican II supporter, he's a big Unia supporter, a big, Eastern Rite supporter in that tolerant way, of course, that he is. And that's why, again, we're going to have an eye on 2025 and see how that goes, because, I mean, we know that the schismatics in Ukraine have been willing to soften on homosexuality to appease the Western powers. So Ukraine is very much it's kind of the battleground for this future potential union, and a lot of these, look, I mean, it's even a battleground within the Catholic Church for this document and whatnot. So it's all very interesting, and we're gonna keep tabs on it very closely. But I guess we'll have to talk about. I mean, I'm assuming the Catholic population in Venezuela, Guyana is relatively large. I don't know how to make this a smooth transition, but we've been covering that front for a while, and it was really looking like it was going to escalate. But it seems that we're getting a bit of a cool down for now. It's still definitely on the radar, but the leaders of Venezuela and Guyana, they met a week and a half ago. I can't remember the exact dates, and they basically agreed to resolve the border dispute diplomatically. And I don't know if that's code for that Guyana is effectively willing to cede some territory or to make a deal with them on some of these oil rights, but it seems that has, that has not flared up as dramatically as it could. Although again, anything could change.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's the first time in one of these conflicts around the world where we saw, unlike the meeting of Zelensky and Putin, which simply has never taken place, or the meeting of a leader of Hamas and Netanyahu, or even in Western Africa, like the oppositionary leader with one of the supporters of the West African coups, we see President Maduro and President Ali of Guyana actually meet in person, shake hands, and actually make an agreement that look, there won't be a resolution through force in this particular issue. And this happened like close to a week ago now, but at this point, it looks like they're actually willing to make concessions. Guyana, which naturally is the current holder of most of this rainforest territory, which is incredibly rich in resources. We spoke about that. It's like literally the size of Greece or the size of Ireland. It's a giant territory which has probably more natural resources than all of Greece combined, right? Despite the sea zones of Greece being quite oil and gas rich. But again, it's like this rich territory, the world, or at least the world powers standing behind Guyana, and even the Venezuelan people, who have a very strong military. It's very, of course, very Soviet-esque type military, very North Korea type. Not the most technologically modern, but they do have an army willing to fight for their country in the hundreds of thousands of troops. So I mean, that's worth something. And at this point, they've made their statement that they're willing to go into Guyana in order to disrupt some of this territory and to, as per the referendum, take over. But at this point, it looks like Guyana will most likely, in the coming year, I think there'll be some contracts written up and certain territory will be ceded or at least leased, probably temporarily, to Venezuela. I think that's the conclusion they're coming to. Again, this is all up in the air, hypothetically, but at this point, we're not looking at a war between Guyana and, over this Essequibo region between Guyana and Venezuela, which I think is a positive for world peace, right? Strictly speaking. But again, for the globalists, I think the reason why this, and we know there's a lot of money behind this, right? Oil companies, transnational corporations, as well as probably the US. I mean, this is the US's backyard. South America has always been the US's like plaything. It has manipulated South American countries for decades now, at least since the World War II. It has been when the US has tested some of its special forces, manipulation of regimes, things like that. So the US definitely has still a very strong hold over South American countries. And I think the US has strictly made this statement: look, we don't want any wars in South America, period, before this next coming election, right? So I think that's the stance at the moment. So this peace, again, may be temporary, but at least it will stand for the time being. And I think it's mostly in the US's favor, I think, Conrad, given the fact that, look, if there will be concessions, and yeah, sure, maybe some money will be lost, let's just say, on the globalist Western US side, but they're happy without a full-on war occurring between Venezuela, because Venezuela, there's a high potential of Venezuela becoming this new Cuba of the 1960s and receiving support from these future BRICS countries, which, again, as the multipolar world rises, these countries will be providing military aid, military future technology to countries like Venezuela. So the US, I think, really wants this conflict to die down, and it has achieved this end.
Well, yeah, the U.S. is going to need the energy down there and whatnot, as of course it seems the rest of Asia and Eurasia is no longer playing ball on their petrodollar game and everything, which, the whole OPEC thing is interesting and we'll get into that. But as the Essequibo thing dies down, we see other fronts, escalating. Of course, Sudan, it seems that the Russian-backed forces have really taken initiative and the rapid response forces, I think is what they're called. They're, the pro-Russian military force that is fighting against the other government in Sudan, and they've made a lot of rapid gains recently. That's increased. Of course, Russia has seen recruitment actually for their, I guess, Wagner and open military operations at this point in the Sahel region. Of course, the last French troops left Niger, so these places, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, are fully within the Russian sphere of influence in that regard. And then, of course, we see China, Taiwan, and as we speak, China has warships headed towards Taiwan, has aircraft, crossing the line, of the Taiwan Straits, and, getting around the island. So then they're just continuing to, press and look and probe and run tests, I'm sure, and run war games and think about it. And they're switching up their tariff strategies and preparing, for the potential economic blockades that would come from all of this and dealing with the loss of the U.S. market and all sorts of things like that, which, again, we're always watching China, Taiwan as the other main tinderbox that could always go hot. But as far as anything else is concerned, Dimitri, I don't know if there's any stories that we've missed or that you think we need to add. It was a good thing you mentioned the Georgia thing. That was big. So it was just one of those things that kind of got lost in the news, especially with, Finland rearming on the border and everything like that. But yeah, the Houthis just, the main story this week. And that's the Red Sea is just, for a while it was the Black Sea and now it's really the Red Sea. And, the Bab el-Mandeb, again, hats off to the Houthis. They've really, like Dugan said, they've really, if it wasn't for them, the Islamic world would be hanging its head in shame.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this Red Sea Operation Prosperity Guardian situation. I mean, for one, for us Orthodox Christians, it is very cringe and bizarre that we have Orthodox Christian Greek sailors actually participating in this charade. Risking their lives in support of Zionist Israel. The Greek warship present at the moment, and the Greek Navy should be focusing on other things. For example, maybe even practicing maneuvers in the future eschatological wars, which will definitely occur in the region. Like we speak about all of that, but wasting resources, potentially Greek lives. What if this Greek ship is taken down by the Houthis? I mean, that'll be would we like Orthodox Christian blood to be spilled in the Red Sea? I mean, probably not. Like this is just really negative. I think it's negative PR for Greece, because Greece, again, Greece is placating itself as a member of this like Western coalition partner with the U.S. against Muslims. I don't think this is what Greece needs. Greece, has already a lot of tension points with Islamic Turkey, and Turkey, again, not being as Turkey is still very aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. So again, there's a lot of really a lot of issues which this particular knot could undo, and let's just not forget about, like, this reminds me of like an old Russian historian, a Russian Orthodox historian, Vladimir Makhnach, passed away in 2009, but in the early 90s he was giving a lecture during the US bombing of Yugoslavia, right, and Serbia especially. So during that bombing, the US had like its navy in the Adriatic Sea, and he was just saying, what if one of the Serbs actually shot a missile at, what if the Serbs organized some attack on one of these US Navy ships? He's saying, Vladimir Makhnach was like, well, this would end the entire war, because again, if one of these ships goes down, hundreds of sailors will die, right? And there's hundreds of American sailors and all their families in the U.S. And what will they call for? Probably not war. They'll probably march on the White House, right? They'll be like, why are we participating in this operation? Vladimir Makhnach was saying, look, all you need to do is take out one of these American ships. He's calling on the Serbians to do that. And then the entire war will end, because the U.S. is not in a state that can afford hundreds of its dead men and boys at sea somewhere across the, for various political gain, like, which are not really defined on the Clinton administration. And today, Joe Biden has even a worse position than Bill Clinton had back in the day. I mean, he's just completely, just really obscure why the US is doing this in the Red Sea, especially in support of Israel. It just doesn't make sense to the regular people. I think, again, we spoke about provocations, Conrad, about, the two USS Eisenhower and the other aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean. This is even more risky. We have an aircraft carrier with thousands of crewmen actually participating very close to hostile territory. Again, could there be a provocation like a 9/11 type event? Could the USS Carney, which we spoke about, shooting down Houthi missiles, could it be taken down by, we've seen the Ukrainians take down the Russian Moskva ship, right? So we've seen Ukrainian tech actually take out the flagship of the Black Sea before. We've seen ships actually sink in the last 2 years, like proper military battleships. Could the Houthis take down one of the U.S. ships and kill a bunch of American boys and guys and sailors? Like, this would be really unfortunate, but a provocation of that level could take place, and I think we should just keep our eyes peeled. Just very negative consequences could arise from this, and I think the globalist leaderships and those in charge of the U.S. Navy, those patriots, should be paying very close attention. Do not let your American Navy, do not let your Navy be subjugated to this swamp control of the deep, military deep state running the U.S. government. I think it's just really dire what could take place.
I mean, the U.S. Navy shouldn't be, the war dog, the sea monster force of world Jewry, but alas, here we are. And unfortunately, I mean, Israel said, we're going to take action on the Houthis if the U.S. doesn't do something. And then a week later, the U.S. launches Operation Prosperity Guardian. And look, it makes sense that, in theory, there's this need to unclog the Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal and free up trade and shipping. The answer to that is to call off Israel and make them stop bombing Gaza, not try to piece together some coalition of the willing and be forced to include Seychelles on the document. I mean, again, you got Norway, Denmark on there. Like, again, France, Italy, they're out. Only Greece and UK even have ships to send. And Australia sent 11 guys. And you got Seychelles on there. So, again, it just shows you that truly the unipolar moment is over. And the U.S. thalassocratic, world navy that is now just, an attack dog for world Jewry has been somewhat defanged. And you have to thank, the Yemenis Houthis. They really, like Dugan said, they've really shown up to the task. But, I think we're about reaching the end here. Again, when it comes to the papacy stuff, people like to cite the example of the Elpidophoros, baptizing the child of the gay couple. And again, he got condemned by the entire church. Even Greece and the ecumenical patriarch condemned him. The Greek government condemned him. And here we now see even one of the more quote-unquote liberal jurisdictions of Orthodoxy fully condemning. I mean, the Greek church is against civil unions as a principle because they believe only Christian marriage is legitimate, and they're obviously against this gay marriage and gay adoption stuff. And of course, we'll see the Greek government, the Greek government is literally just a debt slave to the EU and the US, so they do what they need to do. That's why they send ships for Israel. That's why they legalize gay marriage. They should just get out of the EU. That's one of the main things, and it's terrible that Georgia is going in as well. But, with all of that, thank you so much for listening. Again, be sure to check out that recent Ether Hour. We're going to have another episode coming up. It's not a Q&A. It's going to be about a hard-hitting topic. We're going to get into some stuff. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for some amazing guests in the future. It's really getting great, the people that we have lined up. So stay tuned for that. But it'll make that easier if you support us on the paywall. So worldwarnow.co. That's where you can support us. That's how you can help us out, get behind, listen to all the Ether Hour episodes. It's really great. Follow me on Twitter at GnomeRad. Follow Dimitri on Twitter at OCanonist. The past few days, Elon has put the jets on for him. He's had some crazy viral posts. Been pretty amazing on some pretty interesting topics. But obviously follow WorldWarNow_ on Twitter, on X. That's where we've been doing really well on there as well. Of course, World War Now Telly on Telegram. Follow us on Rumble and YouTube, World War Now. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Watch the YouTube videos. We want to be getting 1,000 views per average on YouTube. We know most people listen on Substack, but, get those views up. It helps us out. Leave a comment. Hopefully we'll do some more live streams on there in the future. But yeah, with all of that, Dimitri, I'll let you send us off.
Thank you guys for the support, and we appreciate all of your help throughout the year. Hopefully this won't be the last episode we release this year, so there should be one or two more, so stay tuned. And 2023 has been amazing. I just want to thank everybody who has supported us throughout it. It's been a difficult year. I think there's been various stresses. Naturally, it depends on where you live. I think everybody has felt some of that post-COVID geopolitical tension. Even if this is your only news source, I think you've kind of gathered from the people around that, in fact, the world is getting a little bit warmer in terms of moving towards some hot, fiery conflict. Unfortunately for us, and here we are, although covering it from an Orthodox perspective, because I think that's what's important, and that wasn't given to us, unfortunately, during prior conflicts like the Iraq War. There wasn't really any Orthodox media covering it from this Christian perspective. The internet has given us this opportunity that we can cover it and judge these situations from at least an Orthodox Christian background, which is, I think, why this show which speaks to its success and speaks to the fact that it's popular amongst some of the most outspoken English-speaking Orthodox Christians on the internet today. And I think me and Conrad have given our best try this year, and hopefully next year we'll work on some of the feedback that you guys have given us. And we're looking forward to another year of news and giving you guys all the best information at the soonest and nearest convenience. So let's look forward to the next year.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Christ the Savior is born.